I'd like to say that my dad is probably the most prolific public art sculptor in at least this region, but if not in the United States. He created more than 75 large-scale bronze sculptures, fountains in public spaces.
My father's first fountain was 1960, and it was the Seattle Public Library, and it was a silicon bronze fabrication. And that fountain, which is 65 years old, is still running and holding up well.
He liked to say that the fountains of Rome have lasted 1,000 years, and his could too.
All of us kids spent a little bit of time around the shop and started out just pushing the broom. But when I was a young child, I also liked to hang out with my father and do wood carving. And I took my first welding class then. That was 1970, and I started working on the Pacific First Federal Fountain. And from there on, I just kind of apprenticed for my father. It was truly, learning the skills in the shop, hands-on, cutting bronze and welding it together. I like to build things, it doesn't matter if it's a railing or what, but he was more diverse in his talent, skills. He did the painting, he did ceramics, he did wood carving. He created really fantastic furniture, and his craftsmanship was very, very high.
I think he valued the idea that the public or people would come and feel the impact of a sculpture that had water in it. He had this strong feeling that water had this magical property. It's a really cyclical kind of method of nature. And he hired a wonderful Japanese-American metallurgical engineer to figure out the water flow systems by pumping the water up through the sculpture itself, and then it falls in a nice pattern and then recirculates. So they invented this system, and the first fountain was located on the Fifth Avenue side of the new public library. Really the first fountain sculpture in Seattle. It was set in a beautiful plaza, and he always told me that it was very important to him to look at the setting, to examine the setting, and to work with the landscape architects to create a built and natural atmosphere that is welcoming to every type of person, children, older people, street people.
George, as kind of the beginning of it, he had an innate sense of how pieces should be put together. And I think the personal mythology story that I tell myself and others is that, he had this sense, especially with the fountains, he had this sense of what the object was going to look like when the fountain was on, even as he was building it. I focus on light-based art, and as I started dealing more and more with light, I just felt like I was doing the same thing. Because you look at my work with the lights off, and it doesn't look like anything. They're almost invisible, which is exactly what I want. And so when you turn the lights on, then it becomes like that's what we're all looking at and enjoying. I had also been working on surface topologies and thinking about surface-mounted lighting. Like many before me, I was very inspired by waves. I really started thinking about waves and also all the forces that we don't see when we just look at waves rolling in from the ocean. We were trying to figure out how we were going to model it in the computer for like 6 months. So we finally got to this model made out of plaster that actually showed it off, and I wanted to illuminate these waves somehow and magnify the motion of the wave. The model that was handmade really informed what we actually wanted to do in the computer model. And we figured out how to manipulate it so that I ended up building this wave essentially just as it came into the shore and is starting to break, and it kind of builds up this irregular crest. And then these stems, for lack of a better word, really kind of show that off. No matter what creative process you're in now, except for like painting, you have to be on the computer. That became really important to me, is just to think about how people put things together and how much we know based on our own hand skills.
I have this great picture of Kenzan as like a 2-year-old wearing a kimono that my mother had put on him, and he was out there in front of one of Dad's big sculptures that was getting ready to be shipped, and he was holding this hammer like he was really enjoying having a tool in his hands. But I think that his pieces don't emulate my dad's pieces, but they use the tactile sense, but also the use of craftsmanship.
Nowadays, people cut things out with computers and all that. I'm still pretty much old hands-on, cutting materials by hand, power tools, and hand forming. Traditionally, bronze was cast. So they made a sand mold and poured the liquid bronze in. And that's been going on for thousands of years. And then in the 1900s, welding was kind of developed. And I'm using a process called TIG welding, which is electric welding. And basically, you take a torch with an electrode and you heat the bronze and you add your filler rod, which is also the same bronze. So it's all homogeneous. The weld seams and the base metal are all the same. And then to prevent oxidation, they have a gas shield around it. When I first started doing sculpture, my father was already very established, and I wanted to create my own image of what I was doing. So my first few shows were very rectangular, linear, hard-edged, straight-lined versus my father's curves. I think as time went by, you kind of soften a little bit, and I thought, gee, my father had some great shapes and curves and like that. And my sculptures became softer and more curved, and using open spaces and holes and things like that kind of really important.
I think he was really pleased that Jerry started to make his own sculptures, and they had worked together for so many years, and that was so important to him, to nurture the next generation, to train him, and then to see him starting to make sculptures on his own.
I feel very fortunate that I had the experience working with my father to learn a lot of those intricacies of how things are being built. Paintings and approaches, to landscape and all that I think influenced my work.
I think growing up in this family of artists, it shows you that this is possible. Like, this is a reasonable avenue to take, first of all, just that representation. And then also, I think for myself, there's just a sense of osmosis that you grow up looking at these photos and these shapes and this form. You watch people work, you watch the choices that they make. All art, I think, is really informed by the tiny choices that we all make that kind of lead us to the final composition.